So I know we're running late, but I'm sure there are going to be a few questions that people may have regarding this session. So I'm going to call in Bruce. Is Bruce still around? And please write questions on the cards if you have them, or come to the microphone either way. See if there's questions. One thing I do want to re-emphasize is the idea of a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trial. So just a reminder, phase 1 is usually the first time a drug has ever been used in a human. Again, Dr. Montgomery mentioned a lot of data emphasizing potential efficacy, but the drug has never been used. And you increase the dose of the drug to determine safety. So that's really why it's used. But enzalutamide, abiraterone, all the drugs we're talking about initially were used in a phase 1 approach, and patients clearly benefited from that. Phase 2, you've established the dose, and now you are trying to determine, is it effective? So just about every patient, they're usually not a placebo-controlled study, every patient gets the drug, and you're getting a signal, is it working? Phase 3, you've got an impression that the drug is working. You need to prove it. Is it better than what's already out there? So if you enroll in a phase 3 trial, you will get at least the standard treatment, the standard of care, and then the potential benefit of a new drug or a new therapy. So I just wanted to emphasize that point. Nola's handing out some surveys, so please look through them. We're always trying to do this symposium better. So let's see if there's any. Here's a question for Dr. Mostegel. What does the latest research tell us about the management of androgen deprivation therapy, such as continuous versus intermittent therapy, optimizing maybe even dosages of Lupron, and then what biomarkers should be checked during androgen deprivation?
Yes, I think the intermittent versus continuous question continues to be of interest. In my practice, I have a lot of patients who are really not interested in being on continuous hormone deprivation. And there is some data for metastatic patients that maybe that's a better approach. But I would say that that is in an era where we didn't have access to a lot of the drugs and treatments that we have now. And so that I'm reasonably comfortable if the patient really has troubles with being on Lupron and wants to pursue an intermittent approach, that with the newer developments that we have coming down the road, that I'm not doing harm to them by letting them do that. I think that the improvements in quality of life and getting away from some of the side effects of the therapy are clearly beneficial, and I think that's a reasonable, it's a very reasonable approach. The other thing that has thrown a wrench in that a little bit is now when we diagnose patients with new metastatic cancer, we put them on often if they have more extensive disease, they'll get chemotherapy in combination with hormone therapy. And so in the studies where they studied chemotherapy up front like that, those patients were intended to be on indefinite androgen deprivation. But that's, again, quite a commitment where it's not clear if that necessarily is important or not. So that's a conversation we end up having a lot, is after someone has been through their chemotherapy for their newly diagnosed disease, how long are we going to continue that hormone suppression? There's no data that really says what to do about that. And so, again, I think it's not unreasonable to go for several years, maybe based on the idea of what we do with radiation treatment, and then go from there, depending on how the patient is doing on the hormone therapy. In terms of timing, based on how to give the Lupron, we typically give our Lupron on schedule. If we're giving it, it's going to be given every 3 months. There are some studies in places where they do it based on what the serum testosterone levels are doing. And so as long as serum testosterone levels are suppressed, you don't necessarily need to take the next Lupron shot, because testosterone levels don't come up right away. It takes a little while for those levels to come back up. And so in a situation where you were trying to be extremely cost effective and really only give, where your goal is to maintain testosterone suppression, not just to give Lupron because it's due, that might be one way of doing it. But I would say the standard approach is really just to give Lupron on time. I do follow testosterone levels. There's really nowhere that says you need to do that. I think when patients are making the transition from being hormone sensitive to castration resistance, you definitely need to document that their testosterone levels are suppressed in the castrate level before you can actually call them castration resistant. Personally, I follow the testosterone levels a little more closely, just because that's my area of research interest, and I'd like to see how it associates with how patients do and how it has influences on, as we go forward, if it changes when I change courses of therapy. But it's not, I would not say, Bruce, you can comment on this, whether following testosterone is really required or not.
I think there's a question about, there's probably no real way to optimize dosing of Lupron, but maybe one of you wants to talk about Degarelix as an alternative in terms of just thinking about maintenance of castrate levels, etc. Pros and cons.
Yes. So the Degarelix is an LHRH antagonist. Most of the other drugs that we use, like Lupron or Zoladex, are LHRH agonists. The advantage of the antagonist is that you get very low levels within 24 hours. And there are pros and cons to that because the shots are every month rather than every 3 to 4 months. They tend to be somewhat more comfortable. And there is some data that is, I would say, inferential so far that suggests that either cardiovascular side effects and or some control of disease may be better with Degarelix, although the data so far suggests that in at least hormone levels in tissue, that there doesn't really seem to be any difference in terms of control. But I think there is at least a hint that it might be better. And I think that there are some data that suggests that these sort of micro spikes of testosterone may be a little bit less of an issue with the Degarelix. Is that what you wanted me to?
Yep. Yep, exactly. So there's a question, are clinical trials dependent on government funding?
Okay, so waiting.
I'm going to answer that if you don't.
Are you going to drain this one? Yeah. So the majority of clinical trials in the United States right now are sponsored by industry because they're very expensive. And so the majority, particularly of larger studies, tend to be supported by industry. The NCI and other foundations do support some studies. Our SPORE, for example, which is a specialized program of research excellence, the NCI gives us money to do translational research that's UW, Hutchinson, and actually OHSU specific. We do have money to do those studies here, but proportionally more of the studies are supported by industry.
I would say that's absolutely true. So some of the more, the type of studies that you heard today where you may have an existing drug and you want to repurpose it for a new use. So you heard about niclosamide. There's no drug company that's going to fund a study like that. And we have many examples. Dr. Montgomery has an interesting study looking at the more neuroendocrine small cell cancer of repurposing an existing drug that's used for an entirely different purpose to target prostate cancer. So those types of studies, since there isn't going to be a immediately patentable commercial market, pharmaceutical companies aren't interested in supporting those studies. So they really depend on either an innovative NIH grant. Turns out the Department of Defense, you may be surprised, supports a substantial amount of prostate cancer research, including these types of clinical trials, and then philanthropy. So the IPCR does support some of the early phase studies that are much more innovative, where we may not see an immediate commercial payout, but could have tremendous patient benefit, I would say. Are there questions? I only got 2 cards. Are there any other questions that people may have that they want to ask? Yes?
When will the presentations be available on YouTube?
Nola, when will the presentations be available on YouTube?
I'll probably take about a week to edit them down, and then I'll be emailing all of you with the link. So I'll do my best to get them as fast as possible.
So I just have a few closing comments, and then we'll adjourn. The talks will be presented on YouTube. We really want ideas for future topics. As you can see, for those of you that have been here every year, we try to mix it up a little bit with some things that we talked about before with updates, and then some entirely new things. But we really need more and want more feedback. Any involvement that any of you would like to have with the Institute for Prostate Cancer Research in terms of research and advocacy, all your efforts are very welcome. And we'll put these this contact information up on YouTube as well. We have had a major effort through the IPCR that we had a 6-component program to really impact prostate cancer. One piece of this was engaging the communities, that is education. We strongly feel that a very educated, enlightened community is the best way we're going to have to influence both policy as well as to make an impact on the disease. So you may have seen that the current budget radically slashed support for biomedical research. It was stunning, and I would say no matter what your political views are, if you are an advocate for curing cancer, you should let your voice be known, that because it will have a devastating impact both immediately and for the next 10 or 20 years. So if you think about your children, very important. So advocacy here is critical. 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 300 children affected by cancer. I will say every year we have a fundraiser at Fred Hutch. For those of you who are cyclists, I know there's some of you out there. We have a team for the prostate cancer research every year. The next Obliteride event will be August 11th through 13th. It's a wonderful event. You can even be a virtual rider. You don't have to leave your chair. You can log on and ride the event. But I encourage you to get out. You heard from Dr. Newhouser and Dr. Wright the importance of exercise. So we're going to adjourn there. I'm sorry it took longer than usual. Please provide feedback. Thank you.